we will. So following the conversation, it will be difficult to separate to a certain extent. It will be also hard not to repeat certain things that we already said. לא, שומעים גרוע. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a problem with the sound, but we'll try to do our best. I will open with few words, and I do think that have a certain significance that exceeds the individual dates and stages. It's more than just concrete. I'm sorry, it's impossible to decipher. Just 1 second, we'll try to fix the audio. 1988, when the first Intifada just began to accelerate before the state of Israel understood the ramifications, the heavy ramifications, not all of them of this particular occurrence, and before the original rifts and the tectonic changes that created a supporting framework for the Washington negotiations and the Oslo Accords. Sain Husseibeh, the Palestinian intellectual, gave an interview to Newsweek, and he said there's something very unequivocal that hurt to me when I read it then, quite exceptional really. And he said that if Israel and the Palestinians will not reach some kind of separation arrangement in the light of unrest that evolved then in the Palestinian arena, we will start to talk about the borders of 1948. And if you wish, in certain senses, and we heard Ohad Chemo and Leor Levy, this is where exactly at least part of the public or publics and sectors are going into this direction. Oslo Accords, the series of understandings of principles and agreements that were formed, signed, and realized within years, were designated to stop exactly that process. And without that, we cannot understand the idea of separation. When we talked about a guiding idea, a guiding principle and vision. So we found ourselves today asking the question, you see it in media and in papers very often, 30 years of the ceremony on the lawn of the White House. Oslo, is it success or failure, partial success, alive or dead? And someone mentioned here already IV, and I think that you'd agree with me that this is indeed some kind of interim state of affairs that is quite unclear. What is in which the reality we experience today is remnants of Oslo, and what is completely different story. We'll talk about that with Professor Kobi Michael, a senior researcher from the NSS, editor of the publication of strategic writings, our guest, Dr. Anat Roth, political sciences PhD. She is the CEO of Shiloh Institute, Forum Shiloh of promotion of knowledge on settlements. She's an activist, a researcher of settlements. And creating knowledge is also, it's an outcome of research that is very dignifying. And General Dr. Dany Tirza, he is a fellow researcher in our institute, and Dany, he's an expert of the well-renowned expert of the spatial planning and strategy, and he had quite a leading role and a senior role in the outline of the security fence, and I will try to be as short as possible with all the credentials of our participants so we can delve into the discussion. Kobi Michael, please, the stage is yours, my dearest friend. About Oslo Accord, I want a more specific question. I would like to ask you a question. Today, what is relevant for the security of Israel when it comes to Oslo Accords? It depends on the place you see it, really. You sit here and... So I do think that the question is, in fact, or the header of this panel, whether it's live or dead, Oslo Accords, is, just to provoke some interest in this curriculum, actually. This question or the wording really reflects some kind of bit of a binary or dichotomical thinking that exists among certain parts of Israeli public that presents quite a shallow approach to the historical depth of the strategic depth of the Oslo process as such. Because I do discern Oslo as concept and as the meaning, significance in Oslo as a process. Oslo as a process obviously suffers from so many diseases and failures. Oslo as a concept, according to my understanding, is someone who still believes in the Zionist endeavor. And I try to actually see the Jewish democratic state prospering and flourishing and safe. The essence of Oslo is that basically perpetuated the idea of separation and removal of Israeli authority and control and responsibility for the Palestinian civil population. This is actually, from my eyes, is a bloodline of the Zionist future. And I'm absolutely sure that it has been accepted by the Israeli public. Obviously, it depends on the matters of whether there is a partner to talk to or not. How shall we do that? What kind of contract framework we need to create? But there is a majority, a fixed majority during the lengthy years that this institute is actually polling the opinion on an annual base when it comes to support to the idea of separation from the Palestinians. It seems to me that the Oslo Accord managed to perpetuate this matter, really. And as far as I'm concerned, I do think that if we want to talk about terms of success that is less specific, the very fact that the current government as well, that definitely is not necessarily can be suspected as a highly optimistic or empathetic towards the Palestinians. They're definitely not tainted with that, but this government gathering as a part of the political and security cabinet decided, in the words of our serving prime minister, that the existence of Palestinian Authority, strong and functioning Palestinian Authority, is vital Israeli interest. The Palestinian Authority, this Palestinian Authority, all of us who maybe don't remember that much, is a direct result of Oslo Accords. They would not be part of the current map. And the very fact that there is a Palestinian Authority, in my eyes, it has also a lot of illnesses and problems, but they do manage the everyday life of Palestinian civilians, and not the state of Israel does it from martial law or civilian authority and any other framework. This is quite a significant achievement, an important achievement, as I think this is, even the government of today does want to preserve this achievement, because the Palestinian Authority does create not just a platform of the everyday life management of the Palestinian population and removes this burden and responsibility from our shoulders, but this authority creates a potential of stabilization of system. And right now this potential was on a certain decline for many years because of problematic functioning of Palestinian Authority and a more expanded process of the process in which we are also participating right now. But I think the pivotal point was July of 2003, where we can actually see a change in Abu Mazen's behavior. Everything was much more determined when it comes to the sovereignty and manifestation of the sovereignty from Jenin and to the south. This is a platform that's supposed to help Israel to create stability of the system. And the stability of the system is a necessary term and condition. It's a stipulation to create any architecture or construction of more expanded nature in the region that will be under the normalization with Saudi's protectorate. I think that was a short answer to a very complex question, but it opens so many topics. Anat, if you can you address those words? My question was, in fact, that concerning the remnants of Oslo, Kobi described a certain aspect that is relevant directly to the security, but it has strategic implementations of more expanded nature toward the state of Israel, and also what kind of reality that Oslo, in fact, dictated or did dictate, in which reality we live today. And how would you describe this reality today, and where will we go, subjected to the interests of the state of Israel? So first of all, I agree with everything they said, as Kobi said. And when it comes to the concepts and when it comes to the interests of the state of Israel, the interest of the state of Israel, again, to continue and to preserve the existing frameworks. I just want to add that when it comes to the interests of Israel when we talk about, live or dead. First of all, let's start with that matter. Okay, Israel is that when Israelis saw Oslo, we came there with the Rabin's statement, enough of blood and tears. So as far as we're concerned, the Oslo was supposed to end the conflict. That was the purpose of Oslo Accords, to end the conflict. And as far as the public sentiment was, at least, I don't know what was exactly the purpose of each of those who participated, but the public sentiment was that was the purpose. That what brought the support. And reaching the end of the conflict, the Palestinian Authority will recognize, more moderate will, less moderate will not, but the Palestinian Authority will recognize the state of Israel. The Jewish state will put aside their weapons, will stop the incitement, and in return, we will do what then they call the painful concessions. We are willing to concede Judea and Samaria. Again, they have value. They have a sentimental and historical and security value, and we're willing to concede. And we believe that the Palestinians, as Father said, gave up the 87% of the other part of the territories. That was the deal. And in the beginning, of course, we thought it will also bring peace and, all the doves and all these beautiful ceremonies and the green lawns. But then, obviously, we lost it. It was off the agenda. But today, even the agreement is two-state solutions can be also unilateral as fact. But we need the separation. That's what people say today. But the core of Oslo Accord was the end of the conflict and the end of all the claims as Barak tried to present it. So the cessation of all the claims. But this dream is dead somewhere there between July of 2000 until January of 2001, between Camp David and Taba was Intifada in the middle that erupted when Arafat threw away and he said, I'm not interested in it. That's it. That's what he said. We just didn't want to listen. He said, I am not interested in this deal. I'm not willing to recognize the state of Israel, the Jewish state. I don't want to have a Jewish state aside the state of Israel, Palestine, of course. I want to replace it. And by the way, here in the beginning of this conference, he talks about this gradual approach, and he said, well, the most important thing is not to sign the end of the conflict. Give me 54% of a state, and from there we'll move forward. So basically, they just wanted to build the ground, and we refused to recognize the reality. And then he opened this war of terror in September of 2000 that basically going back to the military fight, and Oslo died at that point. But all those frameworks, all those formal frameforms, definitions, ABC, all this mechanism of arrangement of security and etc., economical arrangements, all those institutions, they remained empty of any spirit, and that's how we live with that. And the concept that people still cling to, even if we'll wait a little bit and everything failed, but there's no any other solution but two states to two peoples. And from the other hand, we need to reinforce the Palestinian Authority and to strengthen them, because them, the one who is in fact, we're dependent on them so much. We need them strong and vital. So we're afraid to govern, in fact, and to enforce and to stand our ground. And even in the battle that they conduct against us on the international arena, we don't do enough. The enforcement in Judea and Samaria, we don't do enough. The damage upon our heritage sites and the overtaking of the territories C, which is in fact creating the Palestinian state as a bypass of a negotiations route, and etc. We have here, we do recognize that Oslo is dead, but we refuse completely to declare that openly, officially, and to bury it, because it has advantages, of course, but there are disadvantages of such an approach of this current situation. And as far as I'm concerned, the feeling of both parties, the Palestinian Authority, they also need Oslo. They could have declared as well that Oslo is dead, but they didn't. They did not. They did declare so many things dead, but not Oslo Accords, because both parties needed to a certain extent, in fact, but the feeling, the sentiment, that they will drag feet and close their eyes and time will change the reality is misleading, and this is a ticking bomb of time, in fact, and we'll get to that point when we need to do something, and to change the direction and not to sit and do absolutely nothing. Thank you, Anat. So to some extent, there are some that say that, let's not do anything and the time will tell. Both parties, there are different ways of actually seeing whether the time is at our side or against us, in fact. Dany, the stage is yours. On the matters of Oslo Accords, live or dead, or basically in the interim stage. When we talk about the fence, the security fence, we don't need the satellite maps in order to see that, and not necessarily on the green line, the fence is going through, as Barack Obama said, on the basis of 67, that this fence is based on the basis of 67. And at that particular point, the blocks of settlements and the east to the fence, the separation wall, there is a growth, natural growth, one would say. What does it actually mean? The outline, the path of this wall, and the Israeli Jewish settlements at the West Bank, what it actually says about Oslo, whether it's live or dead, and whether one can actually see it as the fence actually draws the border, that if in the future there will be an agreement, it will be set upon these foundations. And how will it align with the Jewish Israeli settlements at the Western Bank? And if you can really, as a future outlook, if it's possible.
Okay, thank you very much. For health reasons, I can't be here, unfortunately. But the fence that we call the security fence, that they call the separation fence, was only meant to provide security. You have to remember that the government that determined it, and they basically determined the route of the fence, not based on political considerations, but rather based on security considerations. So it was the army that led the determination of the route of the fence. By the way, there were those on the... I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a sound issue. We're trying to resolve it. It's not based on it's totally clear that when we get to that day to discuss the borders, that route will remain. In any case, Oslo produced a major change in the field in two senses. One is what Kobi talked about, which is ending direct Israeli control over Palestinian populations. Most of the Palestinian population, we don't control it, but rather the Palestinian Authority they're under the Palestinian control, the Palestinian Authority. And the second thing is a division of the territory, and such that אני שומע את עצמי עכשיו. לא טוב. Okay, that's what you had for us. Okay, that was short and sweet. I admit that I'm surprised. Yes, that is the truth. Now, I'll get back to you later. If you're able to continue talking with your sore throat. Yes, Kobi. Look, you can see the security issues, and in recent times we've been dealing with terror attacks at a growing frequency and intensity, let's say in the past 2 years or so. We see these as incidents that are either as individual incidents or incidents that are not really part of our relationship with the Palestinians. On the other hand, you can also see those attacks as a model for what will happen here between the Jordan and the sea if there is no separation. How would you propose looking at it? And in the security sense, what would be the background with regard to how you what's going on between the Israel and the Palestinian security apparatuses, and how Israel operates in the areas where the IDF does enter the territory? And of those things, what do you tie to the idea that you talked about earlier of strengthening the Palestinian Authority? How do these things work out with each other? This question leads me to a list of 4 reasons that I jotted down in an attempt to explain why the Oslo process had failed. The first reason that I wrote down for myself began, by the way, before the agreement was published to the rest of the world during the negotiation phase. And this connects to your question regarding the security approach. While the Israeli approach, or its point of departure, is 1967, the Palestinian point of departure, and there are those who might say that that's not the case, but it certainly turns out to be that way, is 1948 and not 1967. So this is the first clash. But the real clash is a clash of 2 essentially diametrically opposed views. The Israeli approach is a territorial security approach. The entire purpose of this agreement, in the eyes of Rabin as the prime minister, was to create some sort of an effective platform to improve Israel's security reality by creating a separation between the populations. And he understood that this was what was going to preserve the idea of a Jewish and democratic state. The Palestinian approach is totally different. It's a narrative. It's a history. For them, the Oslo process was a platform for reviving the ethos of Palestinian resistance, the story of the Palestinian return and the Palestinian national issue. Why do I say this ties in? Because it directly ties to what you just asked. What's going on right now in reality, in my understanding, and by the way, I'm not saying this just in response to your question. This has been my position for over a year. Out in reality, what we've identified as terror, and some people still call it a wave of terror, but I think we're in a campaign, an organized campaign of terror. This campaign is already deep within the consciousness of an intifada. It's true that it doesn't have the element of the masses participating, but there's this intifada. It's like changing, the fighting against the existing order. The metaphor that they use is occupation. The first is the occupation, the Israeli occupation forces, and then the other Palestinian authorities. That they basically, that's the idea of this current intifada, that they reject both the Palestinian Authority and Israel. And when we start handling this issue, we first of all must internalize and understand what we're dealing with. If we continue to see this as a wave of terror or a type of terror attacks, which are all about whether they're able to smuggle out the weapons, or whether they are able to get that bomb out or not, will continue being reactive to a great extent, and will continue with this going on, which is going to simply expand, and it's constantly expanding and getting and spiraling. We have to understand the Palestinian approach in this sense, and in this sense, if we want to create a Palestinian Authority that would help us and create a more effective response, we have to try to see how we uh, build this Palestinian Authority in a way that isn't just security oriented, but rather in a way that creates some sort of an entity that whose state function is a level of function that's totally different from what we've seen until today. You need a Palestinian partner so that it doesn't sound pretentious. That's exactly the problem, because at the very beginning, because of this approach, we allowed the Palestinian Authority from day one to act as an entity that is a failed and not responsible entity. We very often cooperate with this. Do you agree with the distinction that Kobi made between the security land approach of Israel's and what's going on in regarding Judea and Samaria, and the Palestinian approach, which is a narrative approach? Is the Israeli approach, does it lack a narrative or a historical side to it? I think that Kobi mentioned those things. And Dany, get ready, because I'm going to ask you the same questions, the identical question, because first of all, I agree with everything that Kobi said. It's just clear that we have clearly Israel has a narrative with regard to Judea and Samaria, but in the context of Oslo, yes, we told ourselves that, as the song says, if we leave the territory, things will be just fine. And we saw this process as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a territorial conflict, while it turns out over the years, there are those who were able to say this at the very beginning, that this is a conflict of identity. It's a conflict between two clashing narratives, the Zionist narrative versus the Palestinian narrative, that we want to establish a Jewish state and they want to establish an Arab state on the same tract of land. Therefore, right now, this is the situation, and if we look forward at what needs to be done, first of all, you need to recognize this. Sometimes dreams do come true, but in this case, dreams clash. And in this case of this clash, we have to recognize the fact that the conflict is apparently intractable right now. There is no magic solution that we can sell immediately. We have to recognize the fact that each side will continue to hold on to its dreams and to find some sort of an arrangement that will respond to what was said in the previous panel regarding the feelings of the Palestinians on the security front, regarding demographics, all of those topics. If I have time, I can give you a few more bullet points. I would like us to have time left for Dany, so try to keep it brief. Okay, so I'll say that largely, first of all, after having recognized that we are postponing. Unlike Oslo, it's not about selling a dream. It's about taking the limitations of reality and to try to use the current tools under those limitations to see what we can achieve. And the first thing is to change that equation that the Palestinian Authority produced, that we collaborate with, which is until we solve the political issues, we won't be dealing with the economy. Tend to call it an economic peace, but it isn't an economic peace. It's a real investment in the economy, where the Palestinian economy is collapsing, and all of the reality of Palestinian life is very tough. They talked about the younger generation. The older generation also, remember when they ask them, those people, what do you want to happen? They want to go back to the day before Oslo.
There was more welfare and more prosperity, and you can create a different reality that will give more hope to the whole Palestinian population, all the residents of the area, the reality that will create hope from demographic perspective. The next point is a breathing separation. Whether we agree or not to the sea territories, we hear and they're there. It's not true. There's no such thing today. You can't separate in the field. During Oslo, there were 80,000 Palestinians in the sea. Today, there is more than 250,000 that are spread there. You cannot create such a separation any longer. First of all, I just put the facts to the table, and this is the reality. You need to look into the reality, into the eyes, and today the Palestinians, again, they are everywhere. You can't really draw a line and say, okay, those are blocks or not. In the blocks as well, they're everywhere, they're within it. So we need to recognize that, and to my understanding, what we need to do, it's not a unilateral disengagement, because you can't really disengage, but some kind of breathing separation. What it means that the Jews and the Palestinians will live in the separate living spaces as it is today in territory C, A, and B, and but in between them there are certain economical tissues that connect them, the economical life, the roads and the trade areas and industrial zones. Excuse me, I just wasn't. No, I apologize, because I have a question to you. Finish the sentence, of course. So yeah, there are certain breathing areas of you need a Palestinian partner, but there is no Palestinian partner at that point, because Palestinian Authority continues to insist that first, and they said that last time in a very blunt manner after Trump's deal of the century. But they are opposed this equation, and Israel has to take responsibility here and to develop the field in a unilateral manner for the benefit to all the residents of the area. If they wish, they will use it. If not, they cannot use it. And it actually means that this whole string of steps, industrial zones, health centers, roads, corridor of infrastructure of electricity, utilities, and etc., that will be connected to the last declaration of the President of the United States of free, the connection to the Europe, not through the economical endeavors and etc., trade area in the Jordan Valley that can actually bring prosperity to the whole region. And then you will turn life and the authority on the territory of the authority into life with hope. Hope to have hope. That's what you mean. Yeah, they will connect to success. Dany, this picture that Anat just presented, and I have to say that there's a certain extent of wishful thinking in my eyes here, because the reality is dictated by people. Solutions is something that people try to word and draft. Do you think that in light of the development of this space, the way you're well familiar with than anyone else in this room, I think, definitely well familiar with, do you think that this reality, the mix of populations and the complexities that emerge from this mix in the field, do you think it's possible, in fact, to reach some kind of state of affairs that will give us grounds that one day we might be able to actually talk about some kind of separation that will be fulfilling the national aspirations of both of the communities that are given under those very complex situations? It's a difficult question. Unfortunately, I think that there's a mistake here, that we want to live within this error of perception. Our wishful thinking is a solution. We try to look for a solution of this story, and the Palestinians are in fact trying to reinforce the refusal and the protest and opposition. They are looking for the end of the occupation than creating a state or anything else of that sort. We just misunderstood why Arafat stood with uniform at the United Nations or at the Peace Congress of Clinton. We intentionally escaped an ability to understand or to solve problems in this way or another. The mix of population is not a good thing. It's not a good thing because it creates areas of friction that in the end of the day go to the aspect of security and the tremendous gaps that exist between the economies and life in both areas. And there is a lot of tension in those encounters, but we need to allow all of them to conduct their own life. The main variable in the field is time. Well, for us as Israelis, we do think and feel and act as this whole territory C is ours, and entry of the Palestinians into territory C is an invasion. Palestinians see it quite the other way around. Today within Judea and Samaria, we do have more than 128 settlements that exist. During the last 2 or 3 years, there's a whole string of 70 agricultural farms slash husbandry farms that caching territories. And if up to 2 years ago we could have said that out of the territories of Judea and Samaria there is a territory that is not held by the Israeli settlements or Palestinian settlements, today the only territories that let's say open territories that are still preserved and one can discuss in the future are territories that are either military range, in significant part 27% of Judea and Samaria is for military use, or the nature reserves in Judea and Samaria that are something like 9% of the territory C. So in fact currently the state of affairs is that majority of the territory is currently, there is a tremendous race towards various Palestinian buildings that are built without permits, and from the other hand, there is the tremendous expansion of the Israeli settlements. It will get to the point that we will be continuing the state of affairs where serving the Palestinian narrative that says the better, the worse this economic situation will be, more people will partake in the resistance. So we shouldn't really improve the life of the Palestinian residents of Judea and Samaria, because then they will get used to live the way they will, and they want to partake in the resistance. From the other hand, we allow the Israeli settlements more and more of ownership at the territory C, and we do not keep it as there's not a stagnation, there is no stagnation here, and if we'll allow the tendencies to evolve within a certain period of time, we'll see a completely different reality in front of us. Thank you, Dany. And we pointed out the problemacy of the territory C. It doesn't mean that A and B are completely absolved of any problemacy or complexity. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about here. I apologize, unfortunately. And this pessimistic note, in fact, we need to thank you and to thank on the panelists. Dany, I'll feel well, of course, Anat, thank you for coming here. And Kobi, thank you for coming as well.